Hi everyone, James here, and I'm back with another electronic foot drum kit. Now, if you haven't seen my first two videos, I've been spending lockdown 2020 designing and building an electronic drum kit that you can play with your feet. This is the prototype that I made back in June, and as you can see, it has started to show some signs of wear and abuse, and that's fine. I made this so that I could break it and so that I could find out what was going to break. I've kept this essential core design, and I've just strengthened the components I thought needed strengthening, and I've improved some things, especially the sensors. So let's get rid of that. And here it is, version 2 of my electronic foot drum kit. I've used the same sound module, but everything else has been built again from scratch. And yeah, it's much better. I will show you exactly what's gone into this in a second, but generally I think I'm happy with this, and I think I would take this to a gig. I would play this one day when gigs are allowed again. So I'm going to take you through a few of the things I've done on this. So the first thing I did was I bought a metal pedal board. This is actually a Pedal Train Classic, but there are many manufacturers that make similar things to this. And it's great because it means I can get a much more sturdy base for the foot drum kit. And I'll be able to also put some Velcro on here and put a fuzz pedal or a looper pedal on later on. The first challenge was fitting the hinges onto the metal frame. Now, I'm not going to do any welding, firstly because I can't weld, but secondly, I want the option to be able to take them off and change parts if and when things break. So I'm going to put it together with bolts, kind of like a giant Meccano set. If anyone, is Meccano still a thing? Is Meccano still a thing? I don't know. So I've attached pretty much everything together by drilling holes and fitting bolts. For the snare pedals, I made an axle from this, which I think is actually a cabinet bolt for fixing wooden cabinets together. I've also countersunk some washers into here as well to provide a little bit of strength, because there is a bit of lateral force. One thing I found from my prototype of this is that when you're playing this, you will end up hitting the snare pedals the wrong way. You'll hit them laterally. So that puts pressure on the hinge point of these snare pedals, which means I needed to design something that would flex when you did this, so it wouldn't immediately break, but also be strong enough to be able to deal with this over and over again, which is why I've got these relatively thin 90-degree mounts, so there is a bit of flex there, but also it's metal, and I've got metal countersunk washers inside the beam, so this should be okay. So previously, if you remember, I made the pedals themselves out of some really cheap pieces of pine that I bought from a shop down the road. Now, for this version, because I'm putting a lot more effort into it now, I wanted to get some proper hardwood. So I've got some offcuts of American oak that I've stained and lacquered. And made the pedals out of those. Now, these should be relatively hard wearing. They're not particularly thick, so they're still quite light, but they should be okay for what I'm using them for. In order to attach the hinges, I've drilled some holes and added these nut inserts. I'm not 100% sure what these are called, but you screw them into the wood, and then the inside has the thread for an M4 bolt on them. So these allow me to, if I wanted to, take the pedal off again afterwards, if, for example, it broke. Always plan for your own incompetence, I say. The other thing I did on the snare pedals is I cut a channel into the underneath with a Dremel tool. One thing I found from my prototype is that because the pedals are quite thin, the wires from the sensors sort of take up the same space as the springs. So for this version, I've cut some very thin channels in so that the wires will sit underneath the surface of the wood and the springs should sit above them, and it should be okay. So that's the basic construction. The springs are exactly the same as on the prototype. I spent a lot of time when doing the prototype getting the spring tension right, and so this is basically the same springs on the second version, and it works very well. Now onto the sensors themselves. One big problem I had from the original version of this was there is always a little bit of lateral movement on the pedals. I spoke about lateral movement on the snare pedal already, but you even get it on these main pedals for your feet. And I found that even the smallest amount of deviation from the striking point can cause it not to pick up the hit. So this time around, I bought some slightly larger piezoelectric sensors, and instead of encasing them in rubber, I've just found these rubber discs that fit perfectly onto the ends of the sensors. So that means that the entire striking area is a sensor, and that lets me line them up with the striking pads a lot more carefully. So I wired all the sensors into the underside of the board where I've got these terminal connections, and these go into some printer cable from an old 1990s printer, and that goes into the same Roland TD4 sound module. Now, we'll talk about this drum module a bit in my previous video, but it is a TD4 Roland percussion sound module. It's really good. It's relatively basic, but for what I need it for, it's absolutely perfect. And that's basically it. It's deceptively simple. It took me a very long time to build this, and a lot of things went wrong. I'll leave you another clip of me playing this, but any questions, pop them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Have a wonderful Christmas, and try to stay safe, everyone. Thank you.